Приветствуем снова зрителей трансляции. В этот раз с нами Sebastian Dashner, который уже столько раз приезжал на наши конференции, что даже начал понимать русский.
Немножко.
Yeah, so how many words in Russian do you know by now?
I would say quite a few words because I'm practicing a lot, but it's still hard to understand when somebody speaks, especially if they speak very quickly, very fast. But I think I'm improving.
And have you tried going to Java talks in Russian?
Yet. So what I do mostly, I do some small introduction or say a few things or a few phrases or sentences during my presentation in Russian, but not a full presentation yet.
Not giving a talk, but listening to a talk.
I actually listened to a few when I was somewhere, maybe for example, for a client visit or when there was something with the company. So actually I listened to a lot of Russian, and I even noticed that I got better at understanding. So I could mostly understand at least the context. And also in IT there are a lot of words that are then familiar and things like that. So it gets better.
What's your native language, and what is the hardest part of Russian for you?
Okay, so my native language is German, which actually helps a lot with understanding Russian because it's somewhat similar in the grammar and in the cases. I mean, there are still a lot of differences. The biggest thing I'm struggling with, I think, is still the cases and the special endings of the words that always change depending on the gender, depending on the case. I mean, we have that too in German with the articles, so you put that information there, and a lot of learners struggle with that as well. And then, of course, understanding just if it's pronounced quickly.
Really, I struggle with this too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And is it just fun to know a bit of Russian, or do you feel that it helps you somehow, maybe at work and outside of work?
It definitely helps with traveling. And I mean, I've been to Eastern Europe and to Russia quite a few times this year, or in general in the last years, but also in general if you travel around, and then it helps even understanding other languages like Bulgarian or even Romanian. I could pick up some things because it has a lot of influence there. And I think it's just a very interesting language in general. And I really like the Cyrillic writing. So that's how I call it encrypted. It's an encrypted language, and it's pretty interesting to just walk around in St. Petersburg and just read all the signs and everything. So I like it, and yeah, I'm practicing that.
How many languages did you try it by yourself?
So I say a little bit of German and a little bit of English. I learned Spanish.
Yeah.
And now Russian. That's what I'm actively learning. And then due to my travels, there are many languages where I literally speak 5 words, but only thank you and please and things like that, which you pick up while traveling. But actively learning, it's or speaking, it's these 4, I would say.
Japanese maybe.
Yes, so I've spent a lot of time in Japan, but given the time I spent there, my Japanese is actually really bad. So I can say, a few things like hello and thank you, and I can order in a restaurant somewhat, but not much more than that.
Okay.
And you have been to our conference Jailbreak in Novosibirsk.
Yes.
And I've seen that you're announced at the new Novosibirsk conference Snow One.
Snow One, yes.
So I think that makes you one of the few foreigners who have been to Novosibirsk and decided to come there again.
Not only been there, but decided to come back. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's true. And actually, that experience, it was, to be honest, it was one of the unique conferences experiences I had at Jailbreak. Just because it's so remote, and the whole experience there, you're in the middle in Siberia, it's snowy, it was minus 20 degrees, but it was also sunny outside, so it was really pleasant to walk around outside. There was a speaker event where we were driving around with snowmobiles, so that was a really cool experience in general. And yeah, I like the place, and I think it's just a cool place to travel to. And there seems to be a lot of interest in Java. For example, the Novosibirsk Java user group seems to be pretty active, so what I see, and I thought, okay, why not try out that conference, and I'm looking forward. Yeah, it's the end of February, so it will be cold, I think, and then let's see how that is.
Oleg was born in Novosibirsk, so I wonder, Oleg, do you have some word of advice for Sebastian and other people who
warm clothes, I guess.
I think the most interesting thing about Novosibirsk in Java is we have a lot of low-level Java developers who create Java SDK, etc.
Right,
I think.
yes.
Yeah. So did you try to speak about low-level things with all these people? Because
Right, a little bit. So I'm usually not that much deep down in the just plain JDK or JVM low-level details. I mean, once I wrote a tool for JAX-RS analysis, which did actually implement a bytecode analysis algorithm. So yeah, I think a few people saw that. But I mostly work with enterprise software right now. So what I speak about sometimes it's a little bit of application server internals, like how that roughly works. But I'm also totally not an expert in that because I'm usually using the software, like using the APIs and using the server. So that is mostly my, like target topics, how to use the technology and how to, implement it in projects. But yeah, I actually like it a lot that people are very interested in that, and they also ask very well-funded questions that go like pretty deeply. Which I like, so people are really interested in these topics.
But by the way, I think in your bio that you is participating in JCP. What do you do here?
In the JCP, I was and still am in a few expert groups. So mostly about enterprise software, like I've been in JAX-RS and JSMP and the config JSR when it still was active back then. And now that pretty much moved to Jakarta, right, to the Eclipse. So now I'm helping out there as a Jakarta committer. But it's basically helping out in standardizing enterprise software, right, and forming these standards, forming these APIs, and just, sharing experience. Okay, what would work? How could you, model these APIs? And I think that's a very interesting field.
So how it is to commit in Jakarta now? It is part of specifications or actual code or something?
Both. I mean, you could commit or you could contribute in whatever you would like, right? Like documentation, this is very important. Or you could just, do anything that somewhat helps the ecosystem, like organize an event even, or, like be active on Twitter, write about it, use the technology. Or, of course, you can help with contributing APIs. So I'm mostly, doing a little bit of all of it, but mostly help like forming the APIs and, of course, writing documentation and then help people like how do they use it, right? Some type of documentation, that as well.
What is the most interesting Jakarta API for now?
Oh, the most interesting, I don't know. I traditionally did a lot with JAX-RS because I was involved in the expert group, and a lot of people really like the API. It's a very nice abstraction over this declarative API with the annotations that people find quite useful. So I really like that concept. I also think CDI is a very, very interesting one, and this is probably what I like the most about JavaEE specifically, because it's very powerful what you can do with CDI producers and with the scopes and everything. And it's pretty much at the core of every modern enterprise Java application, right? Like even if you use microprofile, without most of the JavaEE stuff, you still use CDI. So that's pretty much the core of it. And if you understand how to, like do qualifiers, your own producers if you need them to define your own beans, that's very powerful. I think that's a good one.
I thought that JAX-RS and CDI is well-researched things too many years in this. Do it still evolve or something? What do you think?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. I mean, yes, it's actually very mature. And there are not many things, even now, after a few years, where you say, "Oh, this is this is a deal breaker. I cannot use it because of that missing feature." So it's, I would say, very complete already. There are a few things that we would like to put into, especially with the alignment of if you want to use EJBs, and there are a few things in EJBs that you still cannot quite do with only plain CDI, or it's some extra effort that we would move into either CDI or another specification. The thing is why it hasn't been moved a lot or at all in the last 2.5 years was because of that situation we had, that JavaEE was not evolving, and this is why now it's actually part of the Eclipse Foundation. And now with the transfer going on, we had to wait as well, right? Like with forming these processes, how can we evolve it in the future? But now finally we have JakartaEE 8 out there, and then the next step is, okay, how can we go starting from there? And then of course you can do updates to existing specifications. So then you can update CDI for the few things that might be optimized further to be more future-proof.
So what is the state of Jakarta now? all the transfer processes are finished. And what's next?
Yes, so all of that transfer is finished. JakartaEE 8 is out there. You can even get the Maven dependency, so you can officially use JakartaEE 8, which is super simple because it's literally the same thing like JavaEE 8 for making that transition very easy. That was the plan. And
so it is the drop-in replacement, right?
Yes. So that's just a very easy transfer, which I think is a very good thing. That was a good choice. And now the next thing is because of that package renaming that you probably have heard of with the licensing agreement with JavaX packaging and so on and so forth. That will be, because it has to be, unfortunately, the next step of transferring that to use Jakarta namespace. And that will be one, bigger change of the API where we transfer that. And the idea is where pretty much everybody agrees that we transfer that first before making additional changes, right? So there will probably be something like JakartaEE 9, that's the current plan, that has just that change and nothing else. So there's no functionality change. But then immediately afterwards, because then you're free, you're cut free from all the Oracle and license then agreements and things like that, to change that namespace and all the classes inside in the future. So then you can do JavaEE 10 and whatever, or having minor updates. That's not 100% clear yet, but basically being able to move then afterwards, which is a very good situation.
So do you have like a clear schedule for JakartaEE 9, etc.?
I don't think there is one yet, like in terms of how many weeks or how fast we can do that, because it's actually not that easy. And I thought of myself as well, okay, just change it and done. But once you look into it in a little bit more detail, then you find out, oh, here are some specifications, because it has been around for such a long time, that actually either that old that you actually don't want to migrate it, and people thinking about, things like nobody uses, like XML RPC, or I don't know, like super old stuff that you don't want to touch. You're like, okay, should we even move that into does it make sense to spend effort on that even? And this is what makes it a little bit longer than initially than you would think, because it's not super trivial. It's actually a quite complex scenario. So if you look into the details, it's quite advanced. So I hope that happens very soon.
By the way, is it possible to create like an automated tool or refactoring to migrate?
And actually people have done that. So a colleague of mine from IBM, BJ Hargrave, he already created a tool how to basically do the transfer. And I know from IBM and from other server vendors on the server part, they're also thinking about solution where I can basically throw anything in, whether it's JavaX or Jakarta or a mixture, and it just works. Because of that situation that we have so many legacy applications or applications that use the legacy dependencies that will not get updated, or we don't know, or you might have a mix of many things, including the transitive dependencies, where it really helps if everything just works together, right? And if you do some, you can do some bytecode rematching and some black magic on the server side, where you just say, okay, I don't care which package it is, or you just rewrite it at the start and then it just works. So that is definitely possible. And this really helps, because I think the most important thing is that we make it easy for the users. I don't care if the server vendors have to do some work, although I work for one, but that is much better if the users then can say, okay, then they don't have to do much effort, they can just continue using what they have, or they run such a tool once and then they're done, and then it just works. So that is very important, I think.
Especially if you have no sources.
Yes. That's the next thing, right? You use a dependency, and if you can change it, then it's effort. But if you can't even change it, right? What do? You have the dependency that some people, I don't know, maintained 5 years ago, and it's not even updated, then you don't know. So that's.
And you should do some bytecode manipulations, and it's a very hard thing for ordinary people.
Yes. Don't do that in your code. That has to be done in the implementation. Yes.
By the way, which server do you do?
I mostly use OpenLiberty. And not just because I work for IBM, I actually used it before. I think it's one of the most innovative and fastest server out there, which is always surprising to people. If I say, I use Liberty, and most people know WebSphere, which is, a very bad experience if you compare it. I mean, back then it took like half an hour to start up and whatnot, right? It was really heavyweight, and luckily it has nothing to do with that anymore. So you start applications.
But you can use Liberty Profile or something like that.
Yes, originally it was called Liberty Profile, WebSphere Liberty Profile. And right now that is official offering, so you can get WebSphere Liberty. That is the officially supported offering where you can get support for it and you pay a license, or you get Open Liberty, which is the open source version. And WebSphere Liberty is based on Open Liberty. So if you just want to try it out, or if you want to use it in a project and don't pay license cost, you can just use Open Liberty. Then you just you're on your own without support, but if that's fine, then this is for free and it's fully maintained. And what the good thing is, there are no hidden, contract clauses. So it's not like, oh, you can use it for development, but not for production. And then you're like, okay, this doesn't help me, right? So it's like a fully fledged open source. Get it, use it, do whatever you want with it, right? You can run it in production, that's great. And if you need support, okay, there is support if you want one. And I personally don't care much about the support as a developer, but I care a lot that it's a really innovative one and a fast one, right? So it starts up quickly. In my talk, I will show a way how to redeploy your enterprise applications in less than a second, actually. So it has very modern features, and it has nothing to do with an old application server. So it's a really modern runtime, and it's really fun to use, actually. You can write your code, you can watch for your changes. It immediately redeploys your application. You can refresh your website or your HTTP client, and it's just there. That's really fun to use.
So innovations is about performance or in features too?
Both. So the performance, most of it is thanks to OSGI. They have a very mature modeling structure. If you just use a tiny subset of JavaEE, not the whole stuff, then it's really, really fast. And features as well. Liberty is actually mostly the first runtime that adopts new microprofile features. So if there's a thing like microprofile health, microprofile metrics in an update, then it's typically one of the first runtimes to just have it. So new microprofile version is there, and then literally a few days later, there's a new Open Liberty version, and you can just use it right away. Of course, because the engineers who work on that are involved in microprofile and Jakarta as well. So of course that helps. But it's really, really nice to see because in that situation that we have with Jakarta, where it's not evolving just yet, it really helps, or it's just useful for real-world projects to use Jakarta together with microprofile, right? To say I have a Jakarta application, but I also want metrics, or I want health check or fault tolerance, and you just use both, and that works because Liberty supports both, and it also is fast in adopting new microprofile versions, so you just put them in, and you can use them right away, you get the latest version, and it just works, and it's very fast. So it's, I think, a very modern runtime. The runtime just doesn't get in the way, it just, implements whatever APIs you would like to use in the Java enterprise space.
Well, what about testing? I mean, in very old containers, it takes forever to restart everything.
That's a very good point, and that's also a topic I'm very active to talk about and to write. So I just actually published an article series on the topic of testing. So that's a very good point there. Especially since we have a modern runtime that redeploys quickly, that is really, really fun and effective to test, even in an end-to-end fashion. So not only running unit tests, that's easy, it's in code, right? Your IDE does it. But running your tests in a fashion where I say, oh, I actually write some code, and now I want to test my, JSON HTTP response, like the actual response that my users would go to as well. So you can run your server in a way where that redeploys very quickly, where you write your code and literally instantly you get an update on the server. And then what you do, you just rerun your system tests, your end-to-end test that connect to that running server. So like HTTP or whatever you have, and it just immediately connects. And that is the nice story. By having that life cycle, you write your code, you immediately have the update, and what your test doesn't start up anything. Your test just goes and connects. And that is really quickly because it's it just connects, it's right there. And it's it can start it in a second. So that's or less. That is really effective to use because you write your code and then in less than 2 seconds you get a result. You get the feedback whether it works on an end-to-end example. Not only unit tests, but like the fully fledged test scenario, which is really nice.
Is it working with Docker containers, etc.?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's fully compatible. It's so lightweight that you can embed it in Docker.
Yes, and that is what I'm doing and showcasing as well. If you have a test scenario that uses an external system that you might or might not mock, like mock server, wire mock. If you use an external database, so a little bit more than Hello World, right? Like most projects are, you have some more complex setup, and that just works if we say, okay, my application, I run it in that mode where I can just program really easily. And Docker containers help a lot by setting that up locally, or you can do a Kubernetes cluster local if you want to. And then just you you program against that and you verify it very easily. So that's pretty fun.
Wow.
I think we have time for one more question, and
Please.
I have a very silly one, because I see a number tattooed on your arm, and I can't stop thinking of it because it probably stands for something. So
Yeah.
if it's not something private, can you show it to the cam and tell us what it is?
I can kind of tell it what it is. So it is basically, it is a Unix timestamp.
Oh.
So it's a date that is somewhat important to me, and I didn't want to get just a real, date written as everybody can read, because I'm a, programmer. So I thought it would be cool to have a Unix timestamp, and that's what it is. But it's a question I get very often, especially at the airport security. They're like, "Is this your phone number or something like that?" And I'm like, "No, it's like complicated IT stuff." What a very good question. Yeah.
Okay, one less mystery in the world.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for your answers.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Okay.
Enjoyed it.
И увидимся со зрителями в следующем включении.